The jazz from the rooftop bar spilled out into the humid Atlanta night, wrapping the skyline in gold and noise. Arthur Collins leaned back in his chair, drink in hand, smiling that polished, easy smile he had perfected over the years, the smile of a man who believed nothing in life could surprise him anymore. He was 36 founder and CEO of Viridian Systems, a tech giant worth billions. To his friends, Arthur was the definition of success. Harvard-educated, impeccably dressed a man whose handshake could open doors and close deals. Yet behind every laugh that rippled through the group, there was an unspoken rule Arthur always had to win. "Come on," Collins said, Graham Porter, a venture capitalist with a whiskey-thick drawl. "You've conquered the market, the media, and half the country's supermodels. There's nothing left for you to prove." Arthur chuckled. "There's always something left, Graham. You just haven't found it yet." "Actually," Graham said, grinning as he swirled his glass, "I have an idea, a real challenge, one you can't code your way out of." The others leaned in, hungry for entertainment. Graham continued, voice lowering, "You ever wonder, Arthur, if a woman could love you without knowing who you are? No money, no cars, no headlines. Just you." Arthur smirked. "Sounds like a Hallmark movie." "Not quite," Graham said. "Let's make it interesting. You pick someone completely out of your world, someone who doesn't have a clue about stocks or startups, someone ordinary." He paused, eyes glinting. "Hell, make it someone who doesn't even move in the same color circles as you." A few of the men laughed uncomfortably, but Graham didn't stop. "How about a black woman from the South Side, a waitress, a single mom maybe? Think you could make her fall for you? Marry her even?" Arthur froze for a split second, the kind of stillness that happens before pride takes the wheel. "That's ridiculous." "Ridiculous," Graham echoed. "Or impossible." The table went silent except for the hum of jazz and the clinking of ice. The air thickened with a challenge Arthur couldn't ignore. Pride had built his empire, and pride, once poked, didn't back down. "What are you offering?" Arthur asked finally, his tone almost playful. Graham leaned forward, smirking. $5 million. No prenups, no tricks. Just one condition: it has to be real. She has to believe you're one of her own. No fancy cars, no penthouse introductions. You live her life. You win her heart. Laughter erupted around the table. Even the bartender glanced over, sensing the absurdity of what had just been said. But Arthur wasn't laughing. His mind was already calculating not in dollars, but in ego. He lifted his glass slowly. $5 million, huh? I've taken worse bets." "Then it's settled," Graham said, clinking his glass against Arthur's. "You've got 3 months to find her." As the men toasted and the conversation shifted back to market trends, Arthur's thoughts drifted to the window. Below them, the city stretched wide and pulsing streets lined with stories he'd never walked through, people he'd never had to understand. He had spent his life insulated by wealth, his encounters with struggle limited to headlines and donations. The idea of stepping into another world, one built on survival instead of ambition, amused him more than it frightened him. To him, this was just another experiment. When the night ended, Arthur drove home through the quiet streets of downtown. Neon lights reflected off his car's hood, and his mind replayed Graham's smirk. A black woman from the South Side. He murmured, almost laughing, "What the hell am I doing?" But beneath the mockery, something stirred a flicker of curiosity he couldn't quite name. The next afternoon, he swapped his tailored suit for jeans and an old polo shirt, and decided to explore a neighborhood he'd only ever passed through with tinted windows rolled up. He parked near a row of small diners and convenience stores, the air thick with the smell of fried food and summer heat. A bell jingled as he stepped into Tina's Burger Shack, a narrow restaurant with checkered floors and peeling red booths. The chatter was loud, the laughter louder. Behind the counter, a woman was refilling drinks, her movements efficient and calm. She wore a plain gray uniform, her hair tied back in a bun, her skin glowing with the sheen of a long shift. There was something steady about her, not the weary kind of steady, but the kind that came from knowing life had already tested you 100 times. Arthur ordered a coffee, watching her from the corner of his eye. Her name tag read Amara. When she brought his cup, he smiled, trying to summon the charm that had never failed him. "You make this place look better," he said lightly. Amara didn't flinch. "And you make it look out of place," she replied without looking up. Arthur blinked, momentarily disarmed. "That's fair," he said, laughing softly. "Maybe I needed a change of scenery. Or maybe you got lost," she said, walking away to take another order. He watched her, intrigued. There was no flattery, no nervous laughter, none of the cues he was used to. Just quiet confidence, the kind that didn't need permission to exist. When she passed by again, he asked, "Do you ever take a break?" "Not really," she said, glancing at him briefly. "Bills don't take breaks." He smiled, but she didn't. And that was the moment Arthur realized something for the first time in years. Someone had looked right through him and seen nothing special. That night back in his penthouse, Arthur couldn't stop thinking about the woman at the burger shack. The calm in her voice, the refusal to play his game. He had built a life on winning people over, but Amara Johnson didn't seem like someone who could be bought, and that made her, to his surprise, the most fascinating person he'd met in years. He poured himself another drink, staring out at the glittering skyline. "This isn't about the bed anymore," he muttered. "It's about proving I can matter, without the suit." But in a city still divided by color power and pride, Arthur Collins had no idea what he was stepping into or how much it would change him. The morning rush hit Tina's Burger Shack like a storm. Orders shouted over sizzling grills, the smell of grease and coffee thick in the air. Amara Johnson had been on her feet since 6 a.m., moving through the chaos with practiced rhythm. For 6 years, this was how her days began, with noise, with hurry, with the faint ache of exhaustion that no amount of coffee could fix. "Amara, table 4, wants another round of fries," Tina called from the back, waving a receipt. "Got it?" Amara answered, already halfway there. She dropped off a plate, refilled a cup, smiled politely at a regular who always left a 75-cent tip. To the world, she was just another waitress, invisible, unless someone needed something. But beneath the polite smile was a woman who'd learned to stand tall through every storm. Her daughter Layla was the reason she kept going. 6 years old, bright as sunlight, full of impossible questions about why the world seemed harder for people like them. Amara never had easy answers, only the truth softened with love. When the lunch crowd slowed, she finally leaned against the counter, wiping sweat from her forehead. The bell above the door jingled, and the man from yesterday walked in. Arthur Collins, though she didn't know his name yet. He wore a plain shirt, again sleeves rolled to the elbow, looking like someone trying too hard to blend in. She almost smiled at the thought. "You again," she said, not unkindly. "Me again," he replied, smiling. "Guess I'm a creature of habit. Or you ran out of fancy places uptown." He laughed softly. "Maybe I just like the food." Amara arched an eyebrow. "You don't strike me as a burger and fries kind of guy. Maybe I'm trying to change that," Arthur said, sliding into the corner booth. "Can I get the same as yesterday? And maybe some of your time if you're not too busy." She gave him a look that could cut through steel. "You can get the burger. My time costs extra." "I can pay," he teased instantly, regretting the words when her expression turned cold. "I'm sure you can," she said flatly, walking away. Arthur watched her move through the diner, the easy grace, the way she managed 10 things at once without losing her composure. He didn't understand why her calm rattled him so much. He had negotiated billion-dollar deals with men twice her age and half her empathy. Yet this woman, this waitress, made him feel like the one under scrutiny. When she returned with his plate, he tried again, softer this time. "I didn't mean to offend you. It's just not often someone makes me feel like I'm the one out of place." Amara studied him for a second. "You are out of place, but at least you noticed." He smiled faintly. "I guess that's a start." For a moment, silence hung between them, comfortable but charged. She finally asked, "So what do you really do? You don't look like a mechanic and your hands don't have calluses." Arthur hesitated, then said, "Let's just say I work with computers. It's boring stuff." "Boring pays the bills," she said. "You must be doing fine. I get by." She gave him a skeptical look. "Sure you do." Arthur grinned, realizing she wouldn't buy anything he said unless he earned it. "How about you?" "How long have you been here?" "Too long," she admitted. "It's steady work, though. Keeps a roof over our heads." My daughter," she said simply. "Layla, 6 years old. Smart enough to ask me questions I don't have answers for." He nodded, genuinely curious. "Like what?" Like why some people cross the street when they see us coming. Why her teacher touches her hair without asking. Why her cartoons don't have kids who look like her. Arthur's throat tightened. He wanted to say something comforting, something that didn't sound rehearsed, but all he managed was, "That's hard." Amara gave a small shrug. "It's life. You just learn to keep walking." There was no bitterness in her tone, just quiet endurance. It made Arthur uncomfortable in a way he didn't expect. He was used to problems that could be solved with strategy, not scars you had to live with. When her shift ended, she untied her apron and slung her purse over her shoulder. As she passed his booth, he stood up. "Can I walk you out?" She gave him a wary glance. "It's just the parking lot." "Still," he said. Outside, the late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the cracked pavement. A few kids rode bikes past the diner, laughter echoing off brick walls. "Do you always talk to strangers this much?" she asked. "Only when they make me want to be better company," he replied. That earned him the faintest smile. "You've got lines for everything, don't you?" "Maybe," he said. "But this one's real." Amara stopped beside her old sedan, looking at him for a long moment. "Whatever game you're playing, I'm not interested. I've had enough of promises that sound pretty but end ugly." He met her gaze the first time without his usual armor of charm. "I get it. I just want a chance to prove I'm not like that." Her eyes softened slightly, but she shook her head. "You all say that." Then she got in her car and drove off, leaving Arthur standing in the lot, her words echoing like a verdict. That night, he lay awake in his penthouse, replaying the conversation. Her voice, her restraint, her refusal to let him define the rules. For the first time in years, a woman had told him no. Not out of pride or indifference, but because she had seen too much of the world to fall for empty words. Arthur realized that the game he thought he was playing had already changed. He didn't just want to win a bet anymore. He wanted to understand why her no mattered so much and what kind of man he would have to become to deserve her yes. 3 days passed before Arthur saw her again. He told himself he was just stopping by for lunch, but the lie felt transparent even to him. As he parked outside Tina's Burger Shack, he caught his reflection in the rear-view mirror designer sunglasses, a wristwatch worth more than most people's annual salary. He sighed, took them off, and shoved them into the glove compartment. Inside the diner buzzed with its usual rhythm. Amara was at the counter pouring coffee for a pair of truck drivers. She wore the same gray uniform, but something about her presence drew every eye not for glamour, but for groundedness. Like she belonged everywhere and nowhere at once. When she finally noticed him, her lips twitched in what might have been a half-smile. "You again." "Don't tell me you're here for the food," guilty Arthur said, sliding into a booth. "And maybe for the company. Company costs extra," she said, echoing her line from before. He laughed quietly. "Worth every penny." Amara rolled her eyes and walked off, yet there was less edge in her movements this time. When she returned with his coffee, she stayed a moment longer than necessary. "So, computer man," she said, resting her hand on the counter. "You ever tell me what kind of computer work you do?" Arthur hesitated. "It's complicated. Mostly management. Sounds like a fancy way to say you boss people around." He grinned. "Sometimes. Other times they boss me." "That must be nice," she said dryly, wiping the counter. "Having people who listen when you talk." Arthur tilted his head. "People don't listen to you." Amara looked out the window, where a police cruiser idled at the curb. "People like me learn early that you have to talk twice as loud to be heard half as much. And even then they still think you're angry." Her tone wasn't bitter. It was matter-of-fact, like someone describing the weather. But Arthur felt a weight behind it, something that didn't belong in casual conversation. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "For what? For not knowing that?" She gave a soft, ironic laugh. "You don't have to apologize for being comfortable, Arthur. Just don't pretend you understand when you don't." He nodded. "Fair." For a moment neither spoke. The hum of the diner filled the silence, the clatter of dishes, the hiss of oil, a gospel song playing faintly from the kitchen. Then Arthur asked, "Do you ever get a day off Sunday afternoons?" she said. "Why? Maybe I could buy you a coffee, somewhere that doesn't smell like fries." Amara hesitated. You don't give up, do you? He smiled. Not when something feels worth trying. She looked at him, measuring the words for truth. One coffee, she said finally. If you can find a place on this side of town that makes it strong. They met that Sunday at a small cafe tucked between a laundromat and a church. The sign above the door read, Sweet Grace Coffee House. It was quiet, the kind of place where conversations lingered like perfume. Amara arrived in jeans and a faded denim jacket. No makeup, no effort to impress, she didn't need to. Arthur stood when she came in, realizing too late how much he had been waiting for her. This your idea of a fancy spot? She asked, looking around. I figured you'd like something real. She smiled faintly. You guessed right. They ordered 2 coffees and found a corner table. At first, the talk was light about movies, the heat her daughter's obsession with drawing wolves. Then, as the caffeine settled, the conversation deepened. You ever think about leaving this city? Arthur asked. All the time, she said. But dreams cost money, and roots cost even more. What would you do if you could? Amara smiled wistfully. Teach art. Kids see color without judgment. Adults ruin that. Her words landed heavier than she meant them to. Arthur stirred his coffee slowly. You think all adults ruin it? Not all, she admitted. Just enough to make the rest tired. Arthur leaned back, studying her face. You've been through a lot, haven't you? I've been through life, she said simply. He hesitated. I've been through comfort. Which might be worse. Amara laughed, a warm, surprising sound. That's the most honest thing you've said all day. Then I should say it more often. Maybe you should, she said, sipping her coffee. You talk like someone who's used to being heard, not understood. He blinked, caught off guard. What's the difference? Listening and listening, she said, tapping her chest. One happens up here. The other happens here. Arthur followed her gesture, feeling something tighten in his throat. He wasn't used to being dissected so effortlessly. In his world, people admired him, envied him, obeyed him, but they never saw him. Amara did, and she didn't seem impressed. When the conversation lulled, Arthur found himself asking, Do you believe people can change? She looked at him, puzzled by the sudden shift. Depends what they're changing from. From ignorance, he said quietly. Amara held his gaze for a long moment. If they're willing to do the work, yeah. But most people just want the comfort of saying they've changed, not the pain of proving it. Arthur felt those words sink deep. He wondered which kind of man he was. Outside, church bells rang across the street. Amara looked toward the window. I should go pick up Layla. Let me drive you, he offered. She shook her head. I take the bus. She likes the ride. Maybe I could join sometime. Amara smiled softly. You really don't quit. Not when I'm curious. She stood, sliding her bag over her shoulder. Curiosity's fine, Arthur. Just make sure you're not collecting people like souvenirs. He wanted to protest, to tell her he wasn't that man, except he wasn't sure it was true. Amara walked toward the door, paused, then turned. Thanks for the coffee. Thanks for the truth, he said. She smiled one last time before leaving, a real smile this time, the kind that lingered long after she was gone. Arthur sat there for a while, staring at the empty chair across from him. For a man who had everything, he suddenly felt the strange ache of wanting something that couldn't be bought, convinced, or negotiated. Something or someone that demanded he become more than he had ever been. The following week, Arthur found himself driving toward the South Side more often than he cared to admit. He told his assistant he was researching community engagement initiatives. The truth was simpler and far harder to justify. Every visit to Tina's Burger Shack left him more entangled in a world that didn't revolve around him. He noticed things now, the way customers folded dollar bills twice before handing them over, the tired faces of mothers coming in after double shifts, the quiet pride in Amara's posture, even when her feet ached. That afternoon, the diner was slower than usual. Amara stood by the window, wiping down tables. Outside, 2 teenagers argued near the corner store, voices sharp. Arthur watched her glance toward them with concern. Does that happen often, he asked. Every day, she said. They fight, make up, then fight again. That's life around here, people fighting for space. He nodded. You ever get tired of it all the time, she said. But getting tired doesn't mean giving up. Arthur smiled faintly. You sound like you've been giving pep talks your whole life." Amara gave him a look, half weary, half amused. "When you're a black woman, you don't have much choice. The world keeps trying to break you, so you learn to build yourself back stronger." The words hit deeper than she knew. Arthur wanted to say something to tell her how much he admired that strength, but admiration felt like the wrong currency. He didn't want to sound like another man mistaking her resilience for inspiration. Instead, he asked, "Can I take you and Layla out this weekend? There's a street festival downtown, music, food, face painting. I think she'd like it." Amara hesitated. "You sure you want to be seen there? It's not exactly your crowd." Arthur met her gaze steadily. "Maybe that's why I need to go." Saturday arrived bright and loud. The festival stretched across several blocks, soul food stalls, gospel choirs, kids running between vendors with painted faces. Arthur stood awkwardly at first, overdressed despite his attempt to look casual. Layla tugged at his sleeve, her small hands sticky from cotton candy. "Come on, Mr. Arthur. The ladies painting butterflies." He laughed, letting her pull him toward a booth. Watching her chatter with the painter, Arthur caught a glimpse of Amara, smiling from a distance. It wasn't the polite smile she wore at work. It was softer, freer. For a few hours, they blended into the crowd. They danced badly, ate ribs with their hands, laughed until it hurt. Arthur felt something he hadn't felt in years, ease. When Layla ran off to join a group of children blowing bubbles, Amara leaned against a lamppost beside him. "She likes you," she said. Arthur smiled. "I like her too. She's got your spark." Amara chuckled. "Her spark gets her in trouble sometimes." "Good," he said. "That means she won't let the world dim her." Amara looked at him for a long moment, something unreadable in her eyes. "You talk like a man who's only just realizing the world isn't fair." He exhaled slowly. "Maybe I am. You've had it easy." "Yes," he admitted. "Too easy. I didn't see how different the world looks depending on where you stand." She folded her arms. "And now that you see it, what are you going to do?" Arthur hesitated. "Maybe start by listening, by being here." Amara shook her head gently. "You don't fix things like this with good intentions, Arthur. You fix them by staying when it gets uncomfortable." He didn't answer right away, because deep down he wasn't sure he could promise that. That evening, Arthur drove them home. Layla fell asleep in the back seat, her face still painted like a butterfly. The radio played soft R&B, filling the silence between them. "Thank you for today," Amara said quietly. Layla needed that. So did I. Amara turned to look at him. "Why are you really doing this?" He blinked. "Doing what? Showing up, buying coffee, taking us places. Is this guilt, pity, or something else?" The question struck like a chord out of tune. Arthur gripped the wheel. "I don't pity you, Amara." "Then what is it?" she pressed. He thought for a long moment before answering. "I think it started as curiosity. Then it became respect. And maybe something more." Amara sighed. "Respect's fine. Just don't confuse it with salvation." Arthur frowned. "What do you mean? You can't come into my life thinking you're going to fix it. That's not love, that's ego." He stayed silent, stung by the truth in her words. After a while, she added softly, "You're kind. I see that. But kindness isn't the same as understanding, and I can't afford to let someone play with my peace." Arthur's voice was low when he replied, "I don't want to play with anything. I want to learn." Amara studied his face, the sincerity, the confusion, the effort. "Then start by learning that not every wound wants a cure. Some just want to be seen." The car slowed to a stop in front of her apartment. The building was old bricks faded from decades of sun. She turned to wake Layla, but Arthur spoke first. "Can I see you again?" Amara looked down at her sleeping daughter, then back at him. "Maybe. But next time, don't come trying to save anyone. Just come as you." Arthur nodded, the weight of her words pressing on him long after she disappeared inside. That night, he poured himself a drink and sat in the dark, the city glowing beyond the windows. For years, he had measured worth in numbers, progress in profits. Now he was realizing that the world didn't bend to fairness, and that love, the kind that mattered, couldn't exist without equality. He didn't know what he was becoming, only that the man who made that cruel bet weeks ago already felt like a stranger. But Amara wasn't ready to believe in strangers, not yet. And maybe she shouldn't. Arthur hadn't meant for things to go this far. When the bet began, it was just another way to feed his ego and experiment a dare. But now, weeks later, Amara Johnson had become something he couldn't define. She had dismantled his arrogance without even trying, and that terrified him more than he wanted to admit. Still, his friends hadn't forgotten the wager. It was a Friday night at the private club in Midtown, the kind of place where old money laughed too loud and new money tried to sound like it belonged. Arthur sat at a marble table with Graham Porter and the usual crowd. The air was thick with bourbon and superiority. So Graham said, leaning back in his chair, "Word is you've gone native." Arthur frowned. "What's that supposed to mean?" Graham smirked. "The South Side waitress. I heard she's pretty in that different way. You must be close by now." The table chuckled. Arthur felt heat crawl up his neck. "You're unbelievable," he said quietly. "No, you're unbelievable," Graham replied. "You Arthur Collins, the man who can have anyone spending your time in a burger joint. Tell me it's not serious." Arthur hesitated. He should have said it wasn't, that it was still a game, that he was in control. But the truth wouldn't leave his tongue. "It's complicated," he said. Graham laughed. "Complicated is rich boy code for caught feelings." Arthur's jaw tightened. "What's your point?" "My point," Graham said, swirling his glass, "is that this bet is turning into something else. Either win it or walk away. But don't tell me you're actually falling for her." Arthur stared into his drink, the amber reflection of himself staring back. "And if I am?" The laughter around the table froze. Graham leaned forward, smirking like a vulture. "Then make it official. Marry her." That was the deal, wasn't it? The challenge burned between them. Arthur didn't answer right away. But something prideful and foolish rose inside him, the same fire that had made him accept the bet in the first place. "Fine," he said. "I will." The words dropped like a stone into silence. Graham blinked. "You're serious?" Arthur nodded. "You wanted a show. You'll get one." He stood up, finished his drink, and walked out, his heart pounding with equal parts fury and fear. The next day he drove to Tina's Burger Shack. Amara was outside locking up after the morning shift. The sunlight caught in her curls, and for a second Arthur forgot the noise of his own thoughts. "Hey," he said softly. She turned surprised. "Arthur, you look restless." He laughed, rubbing the back of his neck. "Yeah, something like that. What's wrong?" He met her eyes. "I've been thinking about you." "About us." "Us," she repeated, cautious. Arthur took a deep breath. "I know we come from different worlds, and I know I've made mistakes. But I feel something real when I'm with you. You make me want to be better. For once, I don't want to win anything, I just want you." Amara looked stunned. "Arthur, what are you saying?" "I'm saying," he said, stepping closer, "that I want to marry you." The words hung in the air like an impossible echo. Amara blinked, then laughed nervously. "You're not serious." "I am." "Arthur," she said, her tone sharpening, "you barely know me. You don't know what my life looks like outside of coffee and conversations. You don't know how many nights I go without sleep worrying if the car will start or if Layla's asthma will act up. You live in a world where problems get fixed with a phone call. I don't." "I want to know," he said. "All of it." She shook her head. "You don't even understand what you're asking. You think love is a project you can complete, but this is life. Messy, loud, unfair life." "I'm not afraid of messy," Arthur said quietly. "I'm afraid of meaningless." For a long moment, neither spoke. Then Amara sighed and crossed her arms. "Is this about me, or is this about proving something?" Arthur froze. She had cut right through him. He tried to speak, but she continued. "Because I've seen men like you, Arthur. The ones who say they want to change the world, but what they really want is to win it. If this is about pity or guilt or pride, then stop right here." Arthur's chest tightened. "It's not." "Then why now?" "Because I can't stop thinking about you," he said. "About Layla. About how everything that used to matter suddenly doesn't." Amara looked away. "You sound sincere, but sincerity's cheap when it comes from privilege." He took a slow step forward. "Then tell me what isn't cheap and I'll give it to you." She looked up, eyes glistening. Time, consistency, respect. That's the price. Arthur reached into his pocket and pulled out a small box, a ring simple but elegant. Then let me start paying. Amara stared at it, stunned. You really don't hear yourself, do you? Amara? She stepped back. I can't say yes to a man who still thinks love is something he can buy. Arthur's voice broke. That's not what this is. Then prove it, she said softly. Not with words, with time. He stood there in silence as she walked away, the ring still glinting in his hand. That night, Arthur sat in his car outside her apartment building. The streetlights buzzed faintly, and from somewhere nearby came the sound of a baby crying. He looked down at the ring, then at the empty passenger seat beside him. He had told himself it was love, but now he couldn't tell where love ended and pride began. For the first time, Arthur wondered if maybe Graham had been right, not about the bet, but about him. Maybe he wasn't ready to love someone like Amara. Not because she was different, but because he had never learned what love really meant. The wedding wasn't grand, at least not by Arthur Collins's standards. A quiet courthouse ceremony, a few signatures, 2 rings that didn't sparkle under any chandelier light. No photographers, no press, no family. Amara wore a simple white dress she'd borrowed from her cousin. Arthur, for once, didn't wear a tailored suit, but a plain gray one he'd bought the week before. They stood side by side, strangers bound by vows that neither fully understood. When the clerk pronounced them husband and wife, Arthur looked at Amara expecting at least a flicker of joy. But her eyes were steady, guarded. For her, this was survival, a chance at security for Layla. For him, it was something he couldn't yet name, caught between redemption and obsession. Arthur's mansion sat on a hill just north of the city, a fortress of glass and silence. The driveway stretched longer than most streets in Amara's neighborhood. The moment she stepped inside, the air felt too cold, too clean. Layla's small hand tightened around hers. "Mama," she whispered, eyes wide. "Is this really our house?" Amara forced a smile. "For now, baby." A maid greeted them at the door, her tone polite but stiff. "Welcome, Mrs. Collins. Mr. Collins asked that your room be prepared upstairs. The little girls, too." Amara caught the way the woman's eyes flicked over her from her thrift store shoes to the small box of belongings she carried. A look that said, "You don't belong here." Arthur entered moments later, his voice bright. "I thought you'd like to see the view." He gestured toward the floor-to-ceiling windows that looked out over the city. Layla ran ahead, pressing her face to the glass. "It's so big I can see everything." Amara joined her slowly, eyes on the glittering skyline. "It's beautiful," she said quietly, though her tone lacked wonder. Arthur smiled. "I'll have someone help unpack your things." "That won't be necessary," she said quickly. "I can handle it." The silence between them stretched awkward and heavy. That evening they had their first dinner as a family. The table could have seated 20, but only 3 places were set. Crystal glasses shimmered beneath the chandelier. Layla swung her legs under her chair, too nervous to touch the food. Arthur tried to make conversation. "Layla, do you like your new school? We can enroll you next week." The little girl nodded timidly. "Will they have art class?" "Yes," Arthur said, smiling. "Whatever you want, we'll make it happen." Amara gave a faint smile, then turned to her daughter. "Remember, baby, it's not about what they have, it's about what you make of it." Arthur caught the subtle correction and looked down. He wasn't used to being reminded of limits. His world had none. When dinner ended, Layla excused herself to explore. Amara stayed behind, arms folded. "You don't have to try so hard," she said softly. Arthur frowned. "I'm just trying to make her feel welcome." "I know, but she's not used to all this." He nodded slowly. "Neither are you." Amara's eyes lifted to his. "No, and I'm not sure I want to be." He hesitated. "You don't like it here. It's not that. It's just," she gestured vaguely around the vast dining room. "Everything here feels like it's meant to impress, not to live in." Arthur smiled faintly, though there was no humor in it. "That's what people with money do. We build monuments to prove we've made it." "And what does that prove?" she asked. Arthur thought for a moment. "That we exist." Amara looked around again, her expression unreadable. "Funny, I've lived my whole life with nothing and never needed a monument to know I was alive." In the days that followed, the contrast between their worlds grew sharper. Arthur worked from his home office surrounded by screens and schedules. Amara spent her time organizing the house, cooking her own meals, despite the chef's insistence. The maids whispered when she walked by, not cruelly but curiously, like watching a wild bird wander into a museum. One afternoon, Arthur came home early to find Amara on the back patio painting with Layla. The canvas was small, the colors vibrant red-brown-gold. "What are you working on?" he asked. Layla beamed. "It's us." Arthur leaned closer, smiling until he noticed the colors she'd used for the figures. He was pale blue, Amara and Layla warm shades of brown and gold. "It's beautiful," he said, though his voice sounded distant. Amara caught the hesitation. "Something wrong?" He shook his head. "No, just wondering why I look like a ghost." She smiled faintly. "Maybe that's how you feel here." Arthur chuckled uneasily. Maybe. But later that night, lying awake beside her, the words stuck with him. A ghost. That's what he felt like, haunting a life that didn't quite fit, watching a woman who was alive in ways he had never been. One evening, as rain tapped softly against the windows, Arthur found Amara in the kitchen humming to an old Sam Cooke song while cooking. She looked so natural, their sleeves rolled up, laughter spilling into the air, that he felt like an intruder in his own home. "You like to cook," he said, leaning on the counter. She smiled. "I like the smell of food more than the sound of silence." Arthur studied her face, illuminated by the warm light. "You make this place feel real." She looked at him, uncertain how to take that. "It was already real, Arthur. You just never lived in it." Her words were gentle, but they lingered long after she left the room. Later that night, as he wandered through the hallways lined with artwork and marble, Arthur realized Amara was right. The house wasn't a home. It was a monument to his pride, a museum of everything he'd used to prove his worth. Now, with Amara and Layla inside it, the emptiness finally echoed loud enough for him to hear. The rain hadn't stopped in 2 days. It slid down the tall windows of the mansion in steady sheets, turning the world outside into gray watercolor. Inside the house was quiet, too quiet. The kind of silence that doesn't rest. It listens. Arthur sat in his study, staring at an untouched cup of coffee. The documents on his desk blurred into noise meetings, mergers, profit forecasts, meaningless words from a life that felt increasingly distant. From the living room, he could hear faint laughter. Layla's laughter. He smiled unconsciously, the sound like a small light cutting through the fog. When he peeked around the corner, Amara and Layla were on the floor building a cardboard city from shipping boxes. Crayons were everywhere. One tower leaned dangerously, supported by a bottle of glue. Layla spotted him first. "Mr. Arthur want to help?" Arthur grinned. "Depends. Do I get to design something?" "Sure," she said, handing him a marker. "You can make the park." He knelt down beside them, feeling oddly out of place among the crayons and laughter. His hands, so used to signing contracts, trembled slightly as he drew crooked trees and uneven benches. Amara watched quietly, her expression softening. It was the first time she'd seen him unmasked, stripped of control, simply human. "Not bad," she teased. "You might survive without your spreadsheets after all." Arthur chuckled. "Don't give me too much credit. I just follow the boss's orders." Layla giggled. "That's me." For a brief, beautiful moment, the house didn't feel like a museum, but the calm was fragile. A few days later, Arthur's friends came to visit, unannounced, of course. He was in the front hall when the door opened and Graham Porter's voice echoed through the marble foyer. "Collins, you've been hiding. Thought we'd come check if you'd joined a monastery." Arthur's stomach tightened. He hadn't told them to come. "Not exactly," he said, forcing a smile. "Just taking some time off." Graham's gaze drifted past him to the family photos on the table, to the faint sound of Layla's cartoons in the next room. "Ah, domestic bliss. Didn't think you had it in you." Amara appeared at that moment, her posture calm but cautious. She wore jeans and a plain sweater, her hair wrapped in a scarf. Graham's polite smile flickered with something colder. Arthur introduced them quickly. "This is my wife, Amara." "Pleasure," Graham said, extending a hand that lingered too long in hesitation before she took it. "Arthur's been keeping you a secret." Maybe because I'm not part of his world, Amara said lightly, though her eyes didn't soften. On the contrary, Graham said, smirking. It looks like you've done well for yourself. Arthur's jaw tensed. That's enough. Graham raised his hands in mock surrender. Relax, old friend. I'm just surprised. You always had expensive taste. Amara turned to Arthur. I'll check on Layla, she said quietly, walking away before the tension could thicken further. When she was gone, Graham leaned in. She's gorgeous, I'll give you that. But tell me, are you really doing this? Living like some middle-class family man? Arthur's voice was low. You need to leave, Graham laughed, because I hit a nerve. Come on, Collins, you made a bet. Don't tell me you forgot. Arthur froze. This isn't about that anymore. Graham's grin sharpened. Everything's about that, my friend. You can pretend you care, but we both know what started this game. Just remember you can't rewrite how it began. Arthur's silence said everything. When the front door finally shut behind Graham, the house felt colder than before. That night Amara confronted him. She was sitting at the edge of the bed, her arms crossed, eyes hard. Who was that? Just an old friend, Arthur said. He shouldn't have come. He talked to you like he owns part of you, she said. Like there's something I don't know. Arthur hesitated. It's nothing. Don't lie to me. Her voice wasn't loud, but it was steady, cutting clean through the room's stillness. Arthur rubbed his temples. There was a bet. A stupid one. It was supposed to be harmless to prove I could connect with someone outside my world. I didn't think Amara's face went blank, the kind of blank that hides everything too painful to show. So that's what this is. A game. No, he said quickly. It started that way, but it changed. You changed it. She stood, eyes bright with anger and disbelief. You played with my life, my daughter's life. Do you have any idea what it means for someone like me to trust someone like you? Arthur's throat tightened. I do now, and I swear I'll make it right. Amara shook her head slowly. You can't fix this with promises, Arthur. Not everything can be bought back. She grabbed her robe and left the room. The sound of her footsteps down the hallway was the loneliest sound Arthur had ever heard. The next morning, Layla's crayons were still scattered across the living room floor. The cardboard city lay half-collapsed. Arthur picked up one of the towers, crushed and bent, and set it upright again. It wouldn't stand. No matter how carefully he adjusted it, the foundation was too weak. He sat there for a long time, staring at the fragile city, realizing that his own life, his marriage, his pride, his image had been built the same way, on the illusion that he could build something real on top of a lie. And now the cracks were showing. The next morning the storm outside had thinned to drizzle, but the storm inside the house hadn't eased. Amara barely spoke during breakfast. She served Layla pancakes, packed her school lunch, and moved around Arthur as though he were invisible. When the front door shut behind her, Arthur sat in silence, staring at the half-empty coffee pot. He wanted to fix things to explain, but there was no clean explanation for betrayal disguised as curiosity. He had told her the truth about the bet, but not the whole truth. And deep down, he knew that part would hurt even more. Later that afternoon, Arthur sat in his office, flipping through old financial reports. It was supposed to distract him, but one file caught his attention, a yellow folder marked Ravenwood Acquisition 2015. The name hit him like a ghost. He remembered that deal. It was one of his earliest wins, a small manufacturing plant his company had bought gutted and then shut down to save money. A routine business move. Efficient, profitable, forgettable. But something about it nagged at him now. He opened the folder and scanned the details of a plant in Augusta, Georgia. 312 workers laid off, majority black workforce. The town had depended on that factory. He stared at the numbers, the black ink cold and neat on the page. Then slowly the realization began to form. Augusta, South Side. He flipped to the employee records, scrolling through names, Johnson, Turner, Hayes, Lewis, until one line stopped him cold. Employee Leonard Johnson, floor supervisor, status terminated, plant closure, Amara's father. Arthur's breath caught in his throat. He sank back into his chair, the folder trembling in his hands. It wasn't just coincidence. The factory that had shut down her family's stability, that had forced her into minimum-wage jobs and long nights of struggle, he had been the one who ordered it closed. He closed the folder and sat there in the dim light, his reflection staring back from the black screen of his laptop. The man looking back at him wasn't just guilty, he was complicit. The success he'd built had been carved piece by piece from the lives of people like Amara. That evening when Amara returned from work, Arthur was waiting in the living room. The folder sat on the table between them. "Amara," he said quietly, "there's something you need to know." Her body stiffened at the tone. "Another secret?" "Yes," he admitted, "but you deserve to hear it." She crossed her arms, saying nothing. He opened the folder, pushing it toward her. "This was one of my company's acquisitions years ago, a factory. We shut it down to cut costs." She frowned. "Why are you showing me this?" He swallowed hard. "Because it was your father's factory, the one in Augusta. I made the decision." The silence that followed felt like a wound opening in the air. Amara's face went blank, not from shock but from something colder. "You closed that plant." "Yes." Her voice was flat. "That plant paid for my school books. My father worked there 20 years. When it shut down, he lost everything. We lost our house. He never recovered." Arthur's throat tightened. "I didn't know. Back then it was just numbers on a page." "That's the problem," she said, her voice trembling now. "People like you never see the people in the numbers. I see them now." Now she snapped. "After you've already broken what's left of me, you think your guilt makes you different from the man who signed that order?" Arthur stepped closer, desperate. "I can fix this. I'll reopen the plant. I'll make things right." Amara's laugh was sharp, bitter. "You can't buy redemption, Arthur. My father died believing the world didn't care about men like him because people like you proved him right." Her words hit harder than any slap could. "I'm sorry," Arthur whispered. "I swear to you I didn't know." "Stop saying that," she cut in. "You didn't want to know. Because knowing means you'd have to care. And caring costs something you never had to pay." She turned away, her voice quieter now. "When I met you, I thought maybe you were different. But you were just another man using my pain to feel better about himself." Arthur took a step toward her, but she held up a hand. "Don't. I can't even look at you right now." He froze where he stood. The sound of her footsteps leaving the room felt like a sentence being carried out. That night, Arthur sat alone in his study, the folder still open beside him. Rain returned, tapping softly against the windows. He thought about Amara's father, about the hundreds of people whose names filled those pages. He remembered the boardroom applause when he announced the cost-cutting victory. He remembered how easy it had been to celebrate numbers without faces. And now, those faces were haunting him, one in particular. Amara's. The woman he'd fallen for was the daughter of a man whose life he'd destroyed. The irony felt biblical, the guilt unbearable. The next morning, the house was quiet again. Amara's things were gone from the bedroom. Layla's drawings had disappeared from the fridge. On the kitchen counter lay a short note written in careful handwriting. "I need time. Don't look for us. Amara." Arthur stood there reading the note over and over, as if the ink might change meaning. But it didn't. He walked into the living room and stopped at the sight of the half-finished cardboard city still on the floor. Layla's marker had written home on one of the boxes. Arthur sank to his knees, hands pressed against the crushed cardboard. The rain outside blurred the world again, and this time he didn't try to fight it. For once, the man who had everything finally understood what it meant to lose something that couldn't be bought back. Arthur didn't go to work for a week. He told his assistant to clear his schedule, cancel the meetings, ignore the calls. He couldn't bring himself to care about quarterly reports or shareholder expectations when the only thing that filled his thoughts was the sound of Amara's voice breaking accusing gone. The house felt emptier than it ever had. The kitchen smelled faintly of coffee and memory. Layla's crayons still sat in a jar by the window, each one a small reminder of a world he'd been allowed to glimpse but never truly belonged to. Every night he replayed that conversation, the look on Amara's face when she realized who he was, what he'd done. It wasn't anger that haunted him most. It was disappointment. He had destroyed her world twice, once by ignorance, once by deceit. On the 7th day, Arthur got in his car and drove south. No destination, no plan, only guilt steering him. The highway stretched long and gray, cutting through small towns where billboards promised redemption in the form of barbecue gas and Jesus. By the time he reached Augusta, the sky was heavy with dusk. He turned down a cracked road lined with empty buildings and faded murals, ghosts of a town that had been bled dry by someone else's profit margin. He parked in front of what used to be Ravenwood Manufacturing. The factory gates were rusted, the sign half collapsed, the air still. Arthur stepped out the gravel, crunching under his shoes. He stood there for a long time, staring at the carcass of his success. A voice broke the silence. "You lost?" Mr. Arthur turned. An older man stood by the gate. His jacket worn his eyes sharp. "I used to work here," Arthur said quietly. The man snorted. "Used to? Everyone used to." Arthur hesitated. "Do you know anyone named Leonard Johnson?" The man's expression changed, softened, then darkened. "Lenny. Yeah. Hard worker. Good man. Heart gave out couple years after this place closed. Didn't take the stress well." Arthur swallowed hard. "I knew his daughter." The man gave him a long, assessing look. "Then you know what this place did to folks like her. Promised steady pay took their time, took their pride, then vanished overnight. Left us all ghosts." Arthur nodded slowly. "Yes, I know." The man shook his head. "No, you don't. Knowing means you were here when kids went hungry and families packed up their lives in boxes. Knowing means you heard the silence when the machines stopped." Arthur lowered his gaze. "Then maybe I'm here to listen." The man eyed him warily, then shrugged. "Listening's a start, but it don't bring back what was taken." Arthur spent the next 2 days in Augusta. He walked the neighborhoods where the factory workers used to live, small houses with chipped paint, half-empty porches, dogs barking behind fences. He stopped at a diner where the waitress recognized the logo on his jacket and said, "That company, we used to buy lunches for the guys from Ravenwood. Good men. Didn't deserve what happened." Each story was another brick in the wall of his shame. He kept a notebook writing down names, memories, losses, details that would have never made it into a quarterly report. On the 3rd morning, he met a woman named Clara Hayes, a former line worker who'd started a community center out of an abandoned storefront. She looked at him skeptically when he introduced himself. "You're that Arthur Collins, the one who shut Ravenwood?" He nodded. "Yes. I came to see what I did." Clara crossed her arms. "You came too late. I know," he said, "but I want to help now, however I can." "Help," she scoffed. "Help looks different when it comes from guilt." "I understand." "No, you don't," she said, her tone fierce but steady. "You can't undo what was done, Mr. Collins, but you can decide what you do next." Arthur met her gaze. "Then tell me what next should look like." She studied him for a moment before saying, "Start by putting money where your mouth is. You took jobs. Create some. You closed a door. Open one. Don't talk about helping build something that lasts." Arthur nodded. "I will." When he returned to Atlanta, the decision was made. He called his board and announced his resignation as CEO. Shock rippled through the line. "Arthur, this is insane," one director said. "The company is you. Then maybe it shouldn't be." Arthur replied, "I've taken enough. It's time to give something back." He hung up before they could argue. Over the next weeks, Arthur liquidated a portion of his assets and established the Ravenwood Rebuild Fund, dedicated to reopening small manufacturing sites and community programs across Georgia, all under local management. He didn't attach his name to the press releases. There were no interviews, no speeches. He wasn't trying to polish his image. He just wanted to balance a scale he had once ignored. But none of it quieted the ache. Every night he checked his phone, hoping for a message from Amara. None came. Her absence was everywhere, in the untouched coffee mugs, the quiet halls, the way sunlight hit the empty chair across from him at breakfast. He thought about calling, but what could he say? "I fixed the numbers. Can you fix my soul?" One evening he drove past the small church she used to mention. The lights were on. A gospel choir was rehearsing. He parked across the street and listened through the open window. The harmonies rose rough but alive, each voice heavy with something that wasn't despair, maybe survival, maybe grace. For the first time, Arthur understood that repentance wasn't a speech or a gesture. It was work, quiet, unseen work, the kind you did every day until someone else decided you'd changed. He sat there in his car until the last note faded. The next morning, he wrote Amara a letter. I can't undo what I built or what I broke, but I can build something new, not for profit, but for people, for your father, for you, for Layla. If you never speak to me again, I'll understand, but I'll still keep building, because I don't deserve forgiveness, but I do deserve the chance to earn it. He folded the letter, sealed it, and left it at her doorstep himself. Then he walked away. No expectation, no guarantee, just a man stripped bare, beginning the slow work of becoming someone worthy of love. Autumn bled into winter. The leaves along Peachtree Street turned the color of old brass before falling away completely, and for the first time in his life, Arthur noticed them not from a boardroom window, but while walking home, hands cold, head bowed. He had sold his mansion and moved into a modest apartment on the east side of Atlanta. The furniture didn't match the walls, echoed when he spoke, but he preferred it that way. The silence here wasn't arrogance, it was consequence. Every morning he took the train downtown wearing jeans instead of suits, and spent his days at the community center that had risen from the ashes of his guilt, Ravenwood Rebuild. It wasn't much yet, just a few offices and a dusty classroom, but it was real. He hired local workers, partnered with small contractors, and listened more than he talked. For the first time, his work didn't end in applause. It ended in sweat argument and progress. One afternoon, Clara Hayes, the woman who had challenged him in Augusta, dropped by. "Didn't think you'd actually stick around," she said, leaning against the doorframe. Arthur smiled faintly. "Neither did I." Clara crossed her arms, studying him. "You're different, less polished. I like that. How's it feel building without being the boss?" Arthur wiped dust from his hands. "Feels right. Maybe for the first time." Clara nodded slowly. "Then maybe there's hope for you yet." That night, Arthur stopped by the small park near the center. Kids were playing basketball under flickering lights. A mural stretched across the wall, a new one painted by local teens. It showed a factory transformed into a garden, gears turning into trees. In the corner, someone had scrawled in bright red letters, "Redemption has a color. It's the one we all bleed." Arthur stood there for a long time, reading those words, feeling something shift inside him. He had spent his life hiding behind power and polish, mistaking apology for atonement. Now he finally understood redemption wasn't white or black or gold. It was earned in the bruised shades of human effort. 2 weeks later, Clara found him hunched over blueprints at the center. "Someone came by looking for you," she said. "Didn't leave a name. Just this." She handed him a folded envelope. Arthur's pulse quickened when he saw the handwriting. Amara's. Inside was a single sheet of paper. "I saw the fund, the community center. I heard what you're doing. You kept your word. Maybe not for me, but for something bigger. I don't know what that means for us, but Layla wants to see you. We'll be at Sweet Grace Coffee House on Sunday noon." Arthur read it 3 times before setting it down. For the first time in months, he allowed himself to hope cautiously, quietly. Sunday arrived cold and clear. The same cafe where they'd shared their first real conversation felt smaller, now warmer somehow. Amara sat by the window with Layla, who was drawing on a napkin. When Arthur walked in, Layla looked up and smiled wide. "Mr. Arthur." He knelt beside her. "Hey, Butterfly. You've gotten taller," she giggled. "Mama says I'm growing like a weed." Amara's voice was soft but steady. "She's right." Arthur stood meeting her eyes. There was no anger there anymore, just weariness tempered by something gentler. "You look different," she said. "I feel different," he replied, still figuring out what that means. They sat. The air between them was fragile, like glass that had been cracked but not shattered. Arthur spoke first. "I didn't expect you to write. I didn't expect you to keep your promise," she said simply. "Most men don't. I'm not most men anymore." Amara studied him quietly. "No, you're not. They talked for a long time about Layla's school, about the center, about how small acts could ripple into something bigger. When Amara excused herself to take a call, Layla leaned across the table and whispered, "Mama keeps your letter in her Bible." Arthur's breath caught. "She does?" Layla nodded. "She says it's proof that people can change if they want to." He smiled faintly, the kind that comes from both pain and peace. "She's smarter than both of us." Outside, after coffee, Amara and Arthur stood on the sidewalk. The city hummed around them, buses, laughter, the rhythm of life that refused to stop for anyone's heartbreak. "I don't know where this goes," Amara said finally. "I'm not promising anything." Arthur nodded. "I'm not asking for promises, just a chance to keep showing up." She looked at him, really looked, and for the first time since that awful night, she didn't see the man who had broken her world. She saw someone rebuilding it brick by brick with his own hands. "Layla's art class is looking for volunteers," she said. "You any good with paint?" He smiled. "I'm learning." "Good," she said softly. "Maybe start there." Months passed. Arthur became a regular at the art class, clumsy but dedicated. He and Layla built paper cities again, sturdier ones this time, while Amara watched from across the room, her eyes filled with something close to forgiveness. One afternoon, as they were cleaning up, Layla held up a painting she'd finished. It showed 3 figures standing beneath a tree, one dark brown, one pale one, a blend of both. "What's this one called?" Arthur asked. Layla grinned. "Home." Arthur looked at Amara. She smiled, small, cautious, but real. In that moment, he realized redemption didn't always come with grand gestures or perfect endings. Sometimes it came in small moments of grace, a child's laughter, a second chance, a world slowly repainting itself in kinder colors. And as the sun poured through the classroom window, turning everything gold, Arthur Collins finally understood what it meant to belong, not because of wealth or power or pride, but because he had learned at last to see. Spring crept into Atlanta quietly that year, as if afraid to wake the past. For Arthur and Amara, life had found an uneasy rhythm, not quite together, not quite apart. They met at the community center on weekends, volunteered side by side, shared coffee breaks that lasted a little too long, and avoided talking about what they still carried. Layla thrived in that new space between them. She painted, laughed, and grew a bridge neither adult dared to cross fully. Arthur cherished every small moment, the way Amara's smile reached her eyes again, the way Layla leaned into his side when she laughed. But every night when he returned to his small apartment, the quiet reminded him that love, or what remained of it, wasn't the same as forgiveness. He had rebuilt the world around him, but the foundation between them was still cracked. One evening, Clara Hayes invited them both to a local event celebrating the community center's success. "You two started this," she said, handing Arthur a flyer. "People deserve to hear your story." Arthur smiled faintly. "I'm not sure it's the kind of story people want to celebrate." Clara grinned. "Then make it one they can learn from." The event took place in the same gymnasium where months earlier Arthur had first laid the foundation for Ravenwood Rebuild. Now it was filled with folding chairs, handmade banners, and faces that had become familiar former factory workers, students, mothers, children. Amara stood beside him on stage, uncomfortable under the lights. When the applause settled, Arthur stepped forward. "I don't deserve credit," he began. "I deserve responsibility. But what we've built here, you built it. You made something good out of what I once broke." The room was quiet, not out of judgment but respect. Arthur turned to Amara. "If there's one thing I've learned, it's that redemption isn't a gift. It's a debt you pay every day with the truth." For a heartbeat, their eyes met. Amara nodded, a small silent acknowledgement that maybe, just maybe, he had finally learned to speak without defending himself. Later that night, after the crowd had dispersed, Arthur walked Amara and Layla to their car. The city lights flickered across her face, softening the lines of weariness that time had etched there. "You did good tonight," Amara said. "We did," he replied. "I couldn't have done any of it without you." She smiled faintly. "You would have found a way." Arthur shook his head. "No. You gave it purpose. Before you, I didn't even know what I was trying to fix." There was a long silence, the kind that carried more emotion than words ever could. Amara sighed. "Arthur, I need to be honest. His heart tightened. Always. She looked down. I see the man you've become, and I'm proud of him, but I don't know if I can love you the way I did before. The words hit him like cold rain. Because of what I did, because of what it took for you to change, she said softly. You had to lose everything, me. Layla, your world just to learn how to see us. That kind of love. She paused, searching for the right words. It's beautiful, but it's built on too much pain. Arthur's throat tightened. Then let me rebuild it differently. Amara met his gaze, eyes filled with warmth and sorrow. You can't rebuild something that still bleeds, Arthur. You have to let it heal first. He swallowed hard, nodding slowly. If that's what you need, I'll wait, however long it takes. Amara's smile was tender but sad. You can't wait for me forever. You need to live too. He tried to answer, but no words came. She reached out and touched his hand, a gesture so gentle it nearly undid him. You're not the man who hurt me anymore, but you'll always be part of the story that did. Arthur nodded, the weight of her truth pressing into his chest like gravity. And you'll always be the part that saved me. Weeks passed. They still saw each other, still worked together. But something unspoken lingered between them, an invisible border neither dared to cross. One afternoon, Arthur found Amara sitting alone on the steps outside the community center, her face tilted toward the sun. He sat beside her quietly. Do you ever wonder what would have happened if we met another way? She asked. Every day, he said. Maybe we would have fallen in love sooner, or maybe we wouldn't have noticed each other at all. She smiled faintly. You ever regret it? Arthur shook his head. Regret means wishing it didn't happen. I don't wish that. I just wish I'd been the man I am now when you met me. Amara turned to look at him. Maybe that's the lesson, Arthur. Some people aren't meant to be forever. They're meant to wake you up. Her words sank deep, heavy, and true. He wanted to say that he still loved her, that he still believed in what they could be, but the look in her eyes told him she already knew. Instead, he said softly, Then thank you for waking me up. Amara smiled, a single tear catching the sunlight before she brushed it away. You're welcome. That night, Arthur walked home beneath the streetlights, the city humming softly around him. He thought about how love had once been his prize, his proof of worth. Now it was something else entirely, a mirror showing him who he was and who he could still become. When he reached his apartment, he looked at the letter he'd written months ago, the one Amara had kept. He didn't read it again. He didn't need to. He understood now that love, real love, wasn't about being forgiven. It was about living in a way that no longer required forgiveness. And so as the night stretched around him, Arthur Collins whispered a quiet promise not to win Amara back, but to keep becoming the kind of man she could believe in even from afar. Sometimes love survived. Sometimes love evolved. And sometimes love simply taught you how to let go. The city was quieter in June. The rush of spring had faded, and summer had not yet found its heat. For Arthur Collins, those long gray mornings became his new rhythm. Silence, coffee, the hum of a fan, the world just out of reach. It wasn't heartbreak anymore. It was something heavier, deeper, the weight of acceptance. He still saw Amara and Layla at the community center from time to time. They worked together, laughed together, even argued like before. But every moment between them now was threaded with something delicate, an unspoken agreement that love could still exist without belonging. He never asked for more, and she never offered it. They didn't need to. The silence between them said enough. Arthur's days grew full again. The Ravenwood Rebuild Fund expanded, opening new training programs for laid-off workers in other towns. He traveled across Georgia, speaking quietly in small halls and school auditoriums, not as a man seeking applause, but as one trying to atone. He didn't use big words or grand gestures anymore. He talked about listening, about responsibility, about how empathy was an action, not an idea. Some nights when he returned to his apartment, he found messages from people he'd helped. One woman wrote, "You didn't fix my life, but you gave me a reason to believe I still could." He kept that note on his fridge. It reminded him that redemption didn't end with one apology, it lived in what came after. But quiet change has its loneliness. One Sunday morning, Arthur arrived at the community center early. The sun had barely risen. The air smelled of dust and fresh paint. He walked through the empty rooms, the art studio, the classrooms, the gym, each one humming with echoes of lives that had passed through. In the hallway, he noticed a mural in progress. Someone had started painting two hands, one light, one dark, reaching toward each other, but not yet touching. Beneath it, in careful script, someone had written, "Some distances are holy. They remind us who we used to be." Arthur stared at it for a long time, feeling something tighten in his chest. He thought of Amara, the distance she had created, the one he now respected. It wasn't rejection. It was space for both of them to breathe. He realized finally that silence could be love too, the kind that didn't demand, didn't chase, didn't try to rewrite what was already sacred. Later that day, as he prepared materials for an upcoming youth program, Layla ran into the room carrying a paint-smeared paper. "Mr. Arthur," she said out of breath. "Mama says you should see this." Arthur smiled. "What did you paint this time?" Layla held up the picture proudly. It showed three people, Amara, herself, and Arthur, standing side by side. Above them she had drawn two hearts. One was red, one was gold. "What's the gold one for?" Arthur asked softly. "That's the one that doesn't break," Layla said, grinning. "Mama says some hearts don't have to be together to still love each other." Arthur swallowed hard, his eyes stinging before he could stop it. "Your mama's a smart woman." Layla nodded. "She says you helped a lot of people." "I told her you helped me, too." "How's that?" Layla tilted her head. "You showed me that grown-ups can say sorry and mean it." He laughed quietly, brushing a bit of paint from her cheek. "That's the best thing anyone's ever said to me, kiddo." Amara appeared at the doorway, then watching them. Her smile was soft, not sad, not guarded, just honest. "Layla, go wash up. We're heading home soon." "Okay, Mama." Layla ran off, leaving a trail of small, colorful footprints on the tiled floor. Amara stepped closer. "You've been good with her. She looks up to you." Arthur smiled faintly. "She's the one doing the teaching these days." For a long moment, they just stood there, surrounded by the smell of paint and sunlight. Finally, Amara said, "I've been thinking about what you said that night about waiting." Arthur turned his chest, tightening. "You don't have to say anything." "I know," she said, "but I want to. You were right, I needed time to heal, and I think I'm finally starting to." He nodded, the air between them still, but charged. "That's all I ever wanted." Amara's voice softened. "I'm not ready to start over, but I don't want to keep running from what was good either. Maybe we can build something new, not what we had, but something honest." Arthur exhaled, relief and gratitude flooding through him. "Whatever it is, I'll take it." She smiled. "Then we start with friendship." He met her gaze, steady and warm. "That's more than enough." That evening after they left, Arthur stayed behind to finish cleaning. The sun dipped low, painting the sky in streaks of orange and violet. He walked past the half-finished mural again, and for the first time picked up a brush. Slowly, carefully, he painted a faint line connecting the two hands, not touching but close enough that the space between them glowed. When he stepped back, the meaning was clear. It wasn't about closing the gap. It was about honoring it. As he locked up and stepped into the cool night air, Arthur realized that silence wasn't the absence of love. It was where love learned to breathe. In the distance, the streetlights shimmered gold. Somewhere music drifted from an open window, a gospel song he'd heard once before. "Ain't no mountain too high if you carry grace." Arthur smiled to himself. He had carried guilt, pain, and pride. But now, finally, he carried grace. And for the first time in years, the silence between two worlds didn't divide him, it held him together. By late summer, the air over Atlanta shimmered with heat. The city buzzed with Life Street vendors calling trains, rumbling the scent of barbecue drifting through narrow alleys. But Arthur's apartment remained a world apart, still and quiet. He'd grown used to the simplicity, one bed, one desk, one lamp that flickered when the air conditioner kicked on. It was enough. That evening, as he sorted through mail bills, flyers, donation requests, he found an envelope addressed in a familiar, careful handwriting. The sight of it stopped him cold. Amara Johnson. He turned it over in his hands for a long moment before finally opening it. Arthur. I wasn't sure if I should write this, but words sometimes travel better than people do. The past months have been heavy and quiet, and I've used that quiet to listen to you, to Layla, to myself. For a long time, all I could hear was anger. But lately, there's something else beneath it, peace maybe. Not forgiveness, not yet, but peace. Layla talks about you often. She says you make her feel brave. I think that's what you've always wanted, to build courage in others. Maybe that's your redemption, Arthur. Not the money you gave or the programs you built, but the courage you leave behind in people like her. I still don't know where we're going. But I do know this. The man who made that cruel bet isn't the man who helps my daughter paint sunsets. You've changed, and I'm proud of you for that. Take care of yourself. Keep doing the work. Maybe one day, when the silence between us feels like rest instead of distance, we'll find our way back to each other. Amara Arthur sat very still, the letter trembling in his hands. Outside, thunder rumbled far away, not a storm yet, just a warning that the sky could still break open. He read her words again, slower this time. Every sentence felt like a bridge, not built, not complete, but there. He hadn't realized how much he needed to hear that she was proud of him. Not as redemption, but as recognition proof that the work mattered beyond the numbers, beyond his guilt. For the first time in a long time, Arthur felt tears rise quiet, unforced, almost welcome. He folded the letter neatly and placed it in the top drawer of his desk, beside a photograph Layla had given him, 3 figures under a painted tree, smiling in crooked, childlike color. Beneath it, in bold letters, she had written, "We don't have to match to belong." The next morning, Arthur woke early. The city was still half asleep, its streets slick with the remnants of last night's rain. He brewed a cup of coffee and stood by the window watching the light crawl over the rooftops. He thought of Amara, her voice, her strength, the quiet way she'd changed him without ever asking to. He thought of all the people he'd met through Ravenwood Rebuild, single mothers learning trades, young men earning honest paychecks, retirees mentoring kids who reminded them of their own lost chances. For the first time, he saw how their stories intertwined not as separate lives, but as threads in the same cloth he'd once torn and was now learning to mend. He smiled to himself. Redemption, he realized, wasn't a destination. It was correspondence, an ongoing letter between who you were and who you were trying to be. Later that day, he took a train to Augusta for the reopening of the old factory site. The building had been transformed into a training hub for sustainable manufacturing, solar panels, carpentry, green tech. A banner stretched across the entrance, "Ravenwood Lives Again." When Arthur stepped inside, he was met with cheers and applause. But what humbled him most wasn't the recognition, it was the faces. Faces that had once carried resentment now glowed with something gentler. Gratitude, maybe. Or simply relief. Clara Hayes approached him grinning. "Didn't think we'd see this day, did you?" Arthur shook his head. "Not like this." "You did good." "Collins," she said, "you kept your word." He smiled faintly. "I just followed yours." Clara laughed. "Well, then maybe we both learned something." As they walked the floor, Arthur's eyes landed on a mural near the entrance, 2 hands reaching across a divide, finally touching. Below it, the same phrase from the community center had been painted in bold red letters: "Some distances are holy, but some are meant to close." Arthur stopped reading it again and again until his throat tightened. He whispered almost to himself, "She's right. Maybe silence doesn't have to last forever." That night he returned to Atlanta and wrote a reply to Amara. "Amara, thank you for your letter. I read it more times than I'll admit. You said words travel better than people do. Maybe you're right. But if they can find their way back to you, let these ones carry what mine never could before. You and Layla taught me that love isn't something to win, it's something to serve. I used to chase it like a prize, but now I understand it's a calling. And if my calling is to keep building until the world feels a little fairer, then that's what I'll do. I don't expect forgiveness. But I do hope that one day, when Layla asks what became of us, you'll tell her that 2 broken people built something beautiful out of the pieces. Arthur." He sealed the envelope and left it unaddressed on his desk. He didn't need to send it. Some messages like, "Love didn't have to travel far to reach the right heart." As dawn approached, Arthur stepped outside. The city glimmered after the rain, its streets reflecting the sky like glass. He watched as the first sunlight broke through, turning everything building's windows, even the puddles at his feet, into shades of gold. Redemption, he thought, finally had a color. Not the color of guilt or purity or pain, but of light finding its way through the cracks. And as he stood there, the letter still warm in his pocket, Arthur Collins felt the quiet peace of a man who had finally written the story he was meant to live. Autumn came early that year. The air turned crisp, the trees blushed amber, and the city seemed to exhale. After months of rebuilding, of showing up, of learning how to live without demanding anything in return, Arthur Collins woke one morning with a feeling he hadn't known in years. He wasn't restless. He was ready for what he couldn't yet name. That week, the Ravenwood Rebuild Foundation hosted its first regional conference, a gathering of community leaders, small business owners, and former factory workers who had joined the movement to create jobs across the South. Clara Hayes insisted that Arthur deliver the keynote speech. "I'm not a politician," he said, frowning at the idea. Clara grinned. "Good. We've got enough of those. We need a human being." So he agreed. The event was held in a renovated warehouse on the edge of the city. The same steel beams that once echoed with the sound of machines now carried the laughter of children and the applause of people whose hands knew real work. Arthur stood behind the stage curtain, adjusting his notes when he saw her. Amara. She had arrived quietly, no announcement, no warning. She wore a dark green dress and her hair loose, her presence both grounding and electric. Layla walked beside her, taller now, holding a small notebook and smiling with the effortless joy only children could keep after hardship. Arthur froze for a moment, the air leaving his lungs. He had imagined this scene 100 different ways, but reality outshone every version. He walked toward them slowly, unsure if he should smile, bow, or simply stand there and breathe. Amara noticed him first. "Arthur?" He nodded. "You came." "Layla wanted to see the work you've done," she said. "And maybe." Her eyes softened. "So did I." He smiled gently. "Then I'm glad you're here." When the lights dimmed and his name was announced, Arthur stepped onto the stage to the sound of applause. He didn't look at the crowd, not yet. He looked for her. Amara sat in the fourth row beside Layla, her expression calm, unreadable. Arthur cleared his throat and began. "I used to think success was measured by what you could take, money, power, recognition. I built my life on that idea, and I broke a lot of things along the way." He paused, scanning the room. "But then I met people who taught me that real success isn't what you earn, it's what you repair." A murmur of agreement rippled through the crowd. Arthur continued, his voice steady but humble. "I made a choice years ago that destroyed a community. I shut down a factory to save profit margins. What I didn't know then was that behind those numbers were fathers, daughters, mothers, people who lost more than jobs. They lost hope, and one of them changed my life forever." He caught Amara's gaze. "She taught me that redemption isn't something you get from others. It's something you build yourself piece by piece through honesty and work. And the truth is, I'm still building." The crowd was silent. Then someone began to clap. Then another. Within seconds, the room filled with applause, not the polished kind he used to crave, but the raw human kind that carried gratitude instead of praise. Arthur smiled faintly, his eyes glistening. "Thank you. Not for forgiving me, but for believing that people can still change." After the speech, as the crowd mingled and music filled the air, Arthur found Amara and Layla standing by the mural at the back of the hall, two hands, one dark and one light, reaching toward each other across a beam of gold. "Beautiful, isn't it?" Amara said. "It is," he replied quietly. "But not as beautiful as seeing you here." She turned to face him, her expression warm but measured. "I didn't come to test you, Arthur, or to make promises I can't keep." "I know," he said softly. "You came to see if the man you believed I could be is real." Amara smiled faintly, something like that. They stood there in silence for a moment, watching as Layla ran to join a group of kids painting a banner nearby. "She's growing up fast," Arthur said. Amara nodded. "She asks about you a lot." I told her that sometimes love looks different when it grows up too. He looked at her, heart steady but open. And what does it look like now? She met his gaze. It looks like this, standing here knowing the past is still part of us, but it doesn't define what comes next. Arthur exhaled relief mixing with awe. Then I'll stand here as long as it takes. She laughed softly. You don't have to. I didn't come here to see if you'd wait. I came to see if you'd stayed, and you did. Her words landed with quiet grace. They didn't feel like an invitation or a goodbye. They felt like a beginning. As the evening ended, Arthur helped the volunteers clean up. When he turned around, Amara and Layla were waiting by the door. Walk us out, Amara asked. He smiled. Always. They stepped outside into the cool autumn night. The parking lot glowed under the streetlights, and somewhere far off, a gospel band played faintly from a church window. Layla skipped ahead, humming. Amara and Arthur followed at a slower pace. I kept your letter, she said suddenly. He looked at her, startled. You did? It reminded me that people can write their way back to themselves, she said. You did. Arthur smiled. Maybe we both did. At the edge of the lot, Amara stopped and looked at him. Really looked as if measuring the man against the memory. I don't know what happens next, she said, but I think I'd like to find out. Arthur felt something warm and fierce rise in his chest. Not triumph, not relief, but gratitude. He nodded slowly. Then let's find out. Together. Amara smiled, soft, genuine, unguarded. Together, then. Later that night, after driving them home, Arthur stood in his car a long time before starting the engine. The city lights shimmered like gold veins across the horizon. He thought about everything they had lost and everything they had built, the kind of love that doesn't erase the past but learns to live with it. As he pulled away from the curb, he glanced at his rearview mirror. Through the window, he saw Amara and Layla waving, framed by the glow of their porch light, two silhouettes against the night. For the first time in years, Arthur didn't feel haunted by what he'd done. He felt guided by what he'd become. And when the radio hummed low with a familiar gospel tune, he smiled. Because for once, the return wasn't about coming back. It was about arriving whole, flawed, forgiven, and finally home. Winter sunlight spilled softly through the blinds, laying golden stripes across the floor of the community center. The scent of coffee, mingled with paint and sawdust, the smell of work, of something becoming. Arthur stood by the mural, the one with the two hands now fully joined, and watched as Layla added the final stroke of bright yellow. Her hair had grown longer, her laughter louder. Beside her, Amara cleaned paintbrushes, humming quietly to herself. It had been 6 months since that night of the return. 6 months of quiet rebuilding, not of the world this time, but of a family. They didn't rush. They didn't promise what they couldn't keep. Some days they were friends. Some days they were something gentler, nameless, but real. Love had returned to them not as a storm, but as a season, steady, patient, inevitable. That afternoon, the center hosted its 1-year anniversary celebration. People filled the hall with music and chatter, factory workers who had found new jobs, students who had graduated, families who had reclaimed dignity once stolen by circumstance. Clara Hayes approached Arthur with her usual grin. You realize you've created a miracle, right? Arthur shook his head. No, just gave people a space to create their own. Same thing she said, patting his arm. Don't argue with grace? He laughed, and for the first time in years, it sounded unguarded, free of irony, free of guilt. On stage, Amara took the microphone to thank everyone for coming. Her voice carried through the hall, calm, sure, magnetic. This place isn't just about jobs, she said. It's about remembering that worth doesn't depend on what we have, but on how we care for each other. For too long, people like us were told our stories didn't matter. But now we're writing them ourselves. Applause rippled through the crowd. Arthur clapped with everyone else, his chest swelling with quiet pride. She caught his eyes for a moment, smiled, and continued. And this work, all of it started with one truth. Change isn't colorblind. It sees the wounds and still chooses to heal. That's what real unity looks like. The room went silent for a second, the truth of her words settling deep. Then the applause rose again louder this time, echoing against the walls, until it felt like the whole city could hear. After the celebration, as dusk painted the sky in rose and gold, Arthur and Amara stood on the roof of the center, watching the crowd disperse below. Layla chased her friends in the parking lot, her laughter ringing clear. Amara leaned against the railing, the wind tugging at her hair. "You ever think about how different it all could have been?" Arthur nodded. "Every day. But I think maybe it had to happen this way." She turned to him, curious. "You believe in fate now?" He smiled. "Not fate. Just the idea that sometimes we're broken on purpose so we can be rebuilt the right way." Amara looked away, thoughtful. "You sound like a preacher. Maybe I'm just finally learning how to tell the truth," he said. They stood in silence for a while, watching the sun dip behind the skyline. The city, once his empire, now his teacher, glowed beneath them. "Do you ever miss it?" Amara asked. "The power, the money." Arthur shook his head slowly. "I used to think that power meant control. Now I know it means responsibility. And money." He laughed softly. "It's useful, but it can't buy what I have right now." Amara smiled faintly. "And what's that?" He turned toward her. "Peace, purpose, you, Layla, all of it." Her eyes softened, but she said nothing. Instead, she reached for his hand, not as a promise, not as forgiveness, but as a truth they had both earned. That winter, the Ravenwood Foundation launched a new initiative called Beyond Color, a mentorship program connecting young entrepreneurs from underrepresented communities with industry leaders willing to listen and learn. Arthur refused to take credit for the idea. It was Amara's, he told every journalist who asked. "She's the soul of this place. I just follow her lead." When the first group of students visited the center, Layla insisted on giving them a tour. She led them through every room, ending with the mural in the hall. "My mom painted this," she said proudly, pointing at the joined hands. "She says it means that when people stop seeing color as a wall, they can start seeing it as light." Arthur felt something twist warmly in his chest as he listened. The words weren't just poetic, they were a map of how far they had come. Later that evening, after everyone had left, Arthur locked the doors and found Amara standing again before the mural, lost in thought. "She's got your words," he said softly. Amara smiled. "She's got your stubbornness." They both laughed quietly. Arthur stepped closer. "Amara, I don't know what comes next. I don't want to rush you or us. I just want to keep showing up every day the way you taught me." She looked at him, eyes gleaming in the low light. "Then show up, not as the man who's sorry, but as the man who's learned." He nodded slowly. "I can do that." Amara reached out, touching his face gently, a gesture both tender and grounding. "You already are." That night, as they walked out together, the city was blanketed in quiet snow. Layla ran ahead, leaving footprints in perfect, uneven trails. Amara slipped her arm through Arthur's. They walked slowly, matching their pace to the rhythm of the falling flakes. For a moment, everything was still, the street lamps glowing like halos, the air shimmering silver, the world balanced between then and now. Arthur looked down at Amara and whispered, "You ever think we've gone beyond the past?" She smiled softly. "No, Arthur, we didn't go beyond it. We learned to walk with it side by side." He nodded, his breath clouding in the cold air. "Beyond color, beyond pride, beyond fear." "Exactly," she said. "Just people doing better than before." As Layla turned and called for them to hurry, their laughter joined hers, echoing into the night. The city lights blurred behind the curtain of snow, washing every color into gold. And for the first time, Arthur Collins understood truly and completely that the world didn't need to be colorless to be whole. It just needed people brave enough to see each other fully.